Now what I found with hunting hills and the various winds and thermals that you encounter, there's 3 wind strategies that you need to take advantage of and that you need to learn. And what we do on our setups is we actually create complementary stand setups for, in fact, we have the water hole here, mock scrape right here. So we're defining this movement. We want the deer moving right through here, but we have 2 stands in place to take advantage of morning, evening thermals, morning thermals, side winds, and of course morning winds too. Now this stand right over here, great evening setup. And I say evening because it's below this movement. And so we want our wind to collect out in that horse pasture below us. We want it to settle there in the evening with the evening thermals. Really difficult stand to hunt in the morning. And the reason is because all these thermals and winds want to go uphill. So if we're sitting right down here, then it doesn't matter if it hits here, hits down here 50 yards or over here 50 yards. We're going to hit this movement at some point about 90% of the time. And so we choose just not to hunt there in the morning. It's really hard, but great evening stand. We have access below this ridge line, deer up here back into the bedding areas. They're coming through this movement. And so we can hunt a stand like this with winds that are going to blow out of the southwest. They're going to collect down here, here, here. And then the movement is by and large in front of the stand location. So great evening setup. The closer it gets to dark, the more those thermals are settling down, and they should take it in the right direction. Now, it's downhill that way to the north. So even if we get a side wind, a west wind, the closer it gets to dark, those thermals are going to keep getting pulled down. So if we risk a little movement right here, closer before dark, as long as those deer are moving closer to dark as opposed to 2 hours before, we're going to be really safe. So that's one of the gambles here, as opposed to if it's blowing straight away. Now side winds. We have a great morning stand right up here, and I'll talk about that in a second. But these winds over here, we have open air. And so when you have open air, that wind will come over from this location. There's no hills, there's nothing to obstruct it, and it's going to sweep right through. Now there's a draw just around the corner. So what happens in the morning? If we have west winds, we might think we're safe. These winds blow here, but they're going to blow right back up into the draw, which is a great giant bedding area. So we have to reposition ourselves for the morning. We can't use a stand. Even if the wind was blowing that way, it's going to eventually end up into that draw and spooking out deer into that bedding area. So that first wind set, that evening wind, and even some of these side winds, we have to apply a lot of strategy to this stand location right here. But by the time we add this stand up here, it opens ourselves up to hunt multiple different winds, multiple times a day and all season long. Let's check that one out. Now first, we've taken care of our evening winds right over there. In fact, I can still see that stand. It's 40 yards from me. The scrape and then the water hole are just behind the camera. Now we have this stand number 2. We only have 2 stands in this location, but I feel we can take care of most winds between these 2 stands, morning and evening. So we have the evening thermal settling. When the temperature changes in the afternoon, evening, and it starts dropping, that's when the thermals stop dropping. Not until that time. So a lot of times when you're sitting in a stand in the afternoon, evening, you're thinking, well, I know the thermals are going to settle down this draw, but if they're blowing from the side until the temperatures start to drop, then that wind direction is going to stay stable to the side until the temperatures drop that last half hour, 45 minutes of light. So make sure you have to plan for 2 winds in that situation. Here we have the stand right up here. Now the bulk of the movement is right through here. Again, mock scrape, water hole, all the trails have been cut. There's a log crossing right here where we actually cut out the branches for the deer to cross. Everything's designed to come right through here, which puts those deer primarily in bow range 80–90% of the time of both stands if they come through here. So that's why we have these 2 stands here. But another reason, perfect morning situation here. Now that way, that direction is south, and that goes directly uphill right up the point. We've pulled bedding from the top of there all the way about 200 yards back, so there shouldn't be a lot of bedding on this knoll right up on top. When the winds come over in the morning, they come directly over the top, and then they circle right back up. So we can get into a stand location like that with a south wind that is actually blowing this way, but it tails over the top, curves back up, ends up into Never Never Land up above, and we have a safe sit. That's great for a south-southwest, south-southeast, which are very common winds for this part of Wisconsin, all hunting season long. Every time it stables after a cold front comes through or a warm front, it stabilizes into those winds. Now the bad thing here is we get a south wind, south-southwest, south-southeast. We're pretty good because those winds in the morning are going to blow straight back up. However, if we get a southwest wind, we have open sky over here. It's a long way up the draw, and those winds seem to stabilize, come through here, and what happens is they go around this point and they pull right back up into that draw over here. So the more southwest we have, and especially when it gets to west, southwest, and even west, we risk sitting in that stand and sending our wind all the way around this point into that big bedding draw. So we really have to focus on more a straight south-south wind, southwest, south-southwest, south-southeast. Another great wind in the morning here is an east wind, because it blows out over the hollow and then it's taken up to the top, which is about 400 yards away. So by the time we even have a chance of spooking a deer way up top, I believe that wind is well above. So we're not spooking any deer with an east wind. Another thing, northeast wind. Perfect type of wind. So it's coming from this direction. Again, it's just going right up to the top. But when we start slanting over to southeast, where it's blowing more this direction, especially east-southeast, we start to get into some of this movement over here and just across the draw. So we have that window of east, northeast, maybe a little south-southeast, south-southwest, south, and we can hunt that morning situation here. Important to know that. The majority of my mature bucks have been shot in this wind pattern where I'm hunting the bucks that are below me on a cruising bench and a nice funnel pinch point that we have right here. And of course we're adding to it with the water hole and mock scrape. But that's the bread and butter of my hunting techniques in the hills, to get above the deer, blow my wind to a safe location uphill, letting that wind wrap around from the top and blowing in. Now we can hunt with this wind with a north wind too, or this location, because it's just going to blow right back uphill. So we're pretty safe in this location with north, maybe north-northwest, especially north-northeast, northeast, east, and then of course south, south-southeast, and south-southwest. It's important to consider those side winds, and that's another thing. You know, let's say those deer were coming from above right here and heading down, then we could effectively hunt with a side wind that's blowing straight out of the west, and as it gets closer to dark, it's going to blow straight down here. And as long as we didn't have all this crated down here, the mock drape, water hole, we didn't already have this existing movement funnel. Again, that deer movement was above the stand up here. Then we could expect those winds to blow here, and the closer it gets to dark, get pulled downhill, and then we'd have a safe hunt up here if the deer were on the upper side of the stand. A lot of times my evening bucks that I've shot, especially with a bow, have been below the deer. So I've actually shot uphill to shoot that buck, or at least level, or even just slightly downhill. But again, I'm blowing my scent this way. I'm waiting for that buck to come above me right here. And the closer it gets to dark, the more my wind is cheating downhill and down in the draw. The thermals are pulling it down so that I can have a really safe sit of anything that's coming across in front of me. So you have those side hill winds, the evening thermals, and that wind settling in the evening, and then those morning thermals, and those winds that are typically always going to be above hill. Typically, if you're above the deer in the morning, you're safe. And then in the evening, it gets a little bit more complex because the first part of your sit, those winds are going to be stable, whichever way they're blowing, side hill, especially if there's clean air, meaning that there's no hillsides to obstruct that wind. Then you can hunt that evening set with a side wind as long as it's not blowing somewhere. And then you can expect that closer it gets to dark for those winds to settle downhill. So again, putting it all together, we've tried to take those various wind strategies of morning, evening, and side hill midday winds and use two stands to be very effective for this really high quality movement. We're already starting to get some decent buck pictures here. I think the one we just got today or last few days was a 4-year-old, say split G2. It's got a little bump starting off below its right main beam. But we're excited about this setup. This is what we do with most of our stand locations where we have 2-3 good stands. Again, if an area is good for one stand location, it's probably good for 2 to 3. And that's the strategy we take here. And I hope it makes sense with the various winds that we're trying to use as a strategy for hunting and hopefully harvesting a mature buck out of this area this year.